Hi, friends. Dr. Donna here, working on session 4 of One Common Thread. The one common thread of loss cannot be examined without including grief. And we know grief is complicated and intense. If loss is an expected event that disrupts our life, what is grief? Grief is that emotional response to that loss. It's so funny how we often say, good grief. And you wonder, can grief ever truly be good? Can we get through it? This session will give you a brief overview of the closest companion to loss, the grief response. Grief is like a disorganized play that we never wanted to attend. When the curtain goes up, the actors and the actresses are unsure of their lines. People don't know what to say. We expect sequencing of the scenes, yet they seem jumbled and out of order. The stages of grief are not sequential. Most playwrights ensure the audience of a timely show. Yet once the grief play begins, it seems it will never end. Grief does not have a timestamp, and the stage is dim. The lighting crew may be on strike, for grief can be heavy and oh, so dark. The plot lacks focus, leaving the audience pondering silent, unanswered questions. The questions include the why, the how, the what. Why me? Why us? Why now? How can I get through this? How can we get through this? How can this be God's will? Can anything good come out of this? What now? And what next? And the curtain falls. You exit the theater unsure of the message and you try to find your way home. You see, any change that challenges our life can cause us grief. And we need to redefine GPS. We need a new GPS activation system. We use GPS all the time. We use it to take us to a place we may have never been before. And the acronym, if you don't know, actually stands for a global positioning system that interconnects with satellites and ground-based navigation systems such as your smartphone or your car or your truck. It allows a person to totally rely on the GPS to plot out the very route that you're going to take on your trip. The system can determine a person's specific location on Earth or the starting point, and then provide you with verbal prompts, communicating the detailed instructions to get you to the desired destination or your endpoint. Your GPS will help a person get to the place they need to be. Unfortunately, there isn't a GPS system for a person traveling down the grief highway, or is there? We can create our own acronym and add an extra S, GPSS. It can stand for a grief-stricken person's survival strategy. Totally different, isn't it? Consider this ironic thought. Loss begins with an end. Grief begins with a definite start and an uncertain end. When it hits, we have no idea where we're going. We lose our way. Uncertainty covers us like a blanket on a cold, dark winter night. The grief journey is just as personal as the loss. We all have a grief journey. We've been down the road. How do we handle it? What helped? What hurt? Just like the actors and actresses that didn't know their lines, it's so difficult to know what to say when someone is in grief. Here are only a few tips. And I will let you know that sometimes the words that are used are just because that's generational words that other people used when you were at a funeral for your grandparents, or maybe this is just how people expressed. And sometimes our expressions are hurtful. So words come with weight, if that makes any sense to you. Please don't say, I know how you feel. If my son died and you still have a son and you've never experienced having a son that died, I don't think you're going to know how I feel. And even if you did, we don't know how someone else feels when they're going through a loss. To say he or she is in a better place, or this is God's will, you never want to say anything that has anything to do with God or heaven unless the person brings it up. And one of the saddest things is when maybe time has passed and people go, you should have been over this by now. Grief and loss isn't something that we get over. Grief and loss is something we learn to adjust, not get over like you're going to cross over a bridge. It's something that you're going to live through. It's a process. Now, Grandma would say to you, buck up! Stop your crying, you big ball baby. That's really not helpful because, you really do need to cry and you need to have those emotions and you need to let that out. And don't ever hear this. This is all your fault. No, it's not your fault. God needed him more than you do. Or now they're with Grandma. Now they're with Uncle Matt. No, that doesn't give people a whole lot of peace and comfort. But what does? Know that sometimes you don't need to say anything. When my husband's father died, one of his friends said, Alan, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry Pops died, but I don't know what to say. And there was so much love and kindness in the truth of those words. And so one of the greatest pieces is always know, whatever comes out of your mouth, let it be honest. I don't know how you feel. I can't imagine how hard this is. Those things are honest, emotional kindness. And saying nothing allows other people to talk when they felt they wanted to. So listening is such a vital part of it. If you listen well, and touch, you can hug, you can touch if it's appropriate and welcoming to that person. I am so sorry. I can't imagine what you're going through. This is breaking my heart. There are kind things that are honest, that express that your feelings or your tears with their tears, that means everything. And again, these are only a few tips. You can't go through talking a little bit about grief without jumping into the Kubler-Ross model from back in the 60s. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross dealt with cancer patients, and so she found these stages of grief which have lived on for years. And we find that stage 1 is a natural defense mechanism. It's a good part to help you at that point in time to deny the loss. It is the initial response. It is the first thing that pops up. Oh, it can't be true. Oh, I can't believe this. It sheds the shock. They can't be dead. They can't be gone. And numbness may be your most possible overwhelming feeling at that time. And then No, denial is temporary. It is just wave one. And then anger. It has purpose. It is an emotion that may surprise you and others if you're the kind of person that doesn't get angry. And you're angry. That anger might pop out at different people. That anger might surprise those that you love because you might bark at them. You might be irritable and anxious. You might be really impatient, and that might not be your normal behavior. But remember that this is part of that emotional stage of grief. It's part of the process. Bargaining, if only I could go back to the way it was. Oh, if only I would have done something different. If only I would have been there. This may not have happened. Bargaining. Maybe if I do this, you'll live longer. Maybe if I change my life, I won't have to die of lung cancer. Maybe if I give up cigarettes. Bargaining, depending on what your scenario is, it's going to come to fruition. You're trying so hard, and it's a stage and a part of the process of the grief. And then there's a time where your depression smacks because the reality actually is there. You can't deny it. The loss is here. The grief is here. You really are dead. You really are divorcing me. You can no longer ignore it. Sadness isn't enough. During the stage of depression, you're going to have physical symptoms that are going to go, whoa, I can't sleep. I don't want to eat. I'm exhausted. I don't want to get out of bed. I feel so bad. I'm confused. I can't focus. It's not a good place to be. I don't want to go to work. I don't want to clean the house. I'm not cooking. And there is nothing good in life. I can't see anything but that darkness, that terrible darkness. I see no light in life, no enjoyment whatsoever in life. Whoa, acceptance. Does everybody reach acceptance? It's the last stage of grief, and sometimes, depending on the person, depending on the personality, as we talked about that once before, it all is very dependent on the process for you. I'm aware of the loss. I'm learning to live with it in my own time, my own timeline. So acceptance. It isn't a time that people go, oh, you finally got over it. No. I am adjusting to life without my son. He has nothing to do with me. And I'm adjusting to that life without my son. I am adjusting to the fact that my husband left me for another woman. And this is how it is. And I need to think about that and move forward. So it is adjustment at any level of any grief-producing scenario that you could come up with. And if you have trouble getting there, and we'll talk about that, you might need some help to get to a place of acceptance. Types of grief. This is an amazing thing. If you would Google the phrase types of grief, you're going to find that some people say there are 4, some people say there are 7, some people think there are 16 different types of grief. Ooh, okay. So I've just given you a few. Some people say there is a normal type of grief. And they say it is a natural response to life. And you know that. Grief is a natural response to life and to loss in your life. Anywhere from 6 months to a year, all the signs and symptoms should lessen for you. And that's what they call normal normal process. You've processed it. You've gone through those stages. You're moving on. And then you have an absent grief. What is that? That's when you are in such shock and such denial that you disassociate yourself with all of it. Anticipatory, you can be a wordsmith and look at that and go, oh, I know what anticipation means. Anticipation. What does that mean? That means that you know something's coming. You can anticipate the loss. That's when you have a terminal life-threatening illness of a loved one. That's when you receive the separation and divorce papers and you know it's going to happen. You have some time that grief isn't here, the loss isn't totally here yet, but it's on the way and you know it's coming. It's inevitable. A delayed grief. Now this makes a lot of sense when you think about a delayed grief reaction. When someone dies, you have to deal with all the financial situation. You have to do the funeral planning. You have to figure out where the meal is going to be to feed the family, or the church involvement, or getting all the relatives together. And you are so involved in the busyness of taking care of the grandiose parts of the loss. The delayed grief will strike you days later, weeks later, months later than you expect. And some people don't deal with it for quite a while and then it shows up. You have to deal with all this busyness that you don't allow your feelings to come forward. You do not allow yourself to experience the grief. And then disenfranchised grief. I actually have a story about this. Society and culture, they don't agree with your loss. They don't put it in the same bucket of loss that you do. Young woman commits suicide. And you know they have it now that you can put things on the funeral home. You can write little excerpts of encouragement or love. Well, this woman committed suicide and she left her sweet parents with her little boy. And so they were just distraught. Here now they have a little 5-year-old that they are going to raise. And some of the unkindness that was shot out there, holding back nothing, blaming the parents for the suicide of their daughter. Unkind. Because these people felt that suicide was a terrible thing that should never have happened, and they should have raised their daughter better, and they should have seen the signs. And it was probably one of the saddest funerals I have ever been to, because I found out that there's such a thing as people who don't give you that encouragement. So if your person that you loved died of suicide or substance abuse or sexual transmitted disease, or they left the faith that you believe in, that doesn't give you any right to be hurtful to people. But that disenfranchised grief is very, very difficult for the people that are grieving, to think that their grief has no value. And that is disenfranchised grief. Your complicated grief is a very prolonged stage of the grieving process. The person is actually stuck like in quicksand. They need a professional helper to move forward. Complicated grief, there's a lot written about that. There's a lot of articles written about that. It is when you just can't get over things. And I'm not talking within that 6 months to a year, or even, 2 years, 3 years, you still can't move forward. You can't let go of that grieving loss. And then you have collective. Collective grief we've all experienced if you are my age or even younger. If you remember 9/11 and you remember COVID-19, we all experienced unbelievable numbers of death due to that virus and due to terrorist attack. And we did it collectively as a country, as a nation, as a world. We all saw all that death. Those numbers were ticking on the news. On your TV, you saw the number of hospitalizations, the number of deaths. It was constantly in front of you, and it was breaking your heart. And then we have traumatic, and traumatic is, wow. It can be due to murder. It can be due to traumatic death that is so sudden. And the signs and symptoms of sadness and anger and loneliness during traumatic can actually increase instead of decrease long after the event. It can be the death of a child. And a lot of, it can be an accident, a train wreck. It's just very traumatic. It's not something that we expect. Granted, a lot of times loss isn't, but it's of a higher magnitude. Maybe it was homicide. Maybe it was murder. Maybe it was a war accident that never should have happened. That can cause a traumatic scenario. Let's take a quick glance at some of the grief statistics, and I will tell you that at the end of our lessons, I'm going to be compiling a reference sheet for you with all kinds of websites you can go to and different books that we've made references to through these lessons. But your grief statistics, every year Americans lose their jobs, your pets die, you have fractured relationships with friends and family or death, and the complicated emotional experience called grief is going to smack everybody sometime in our life. We all travel down that grief highway at one point or another. And here are some statistics. You know, the older that you get, the more your grief bucket's going to be full. And 2.5 million people die every year. And we can't ever forget about the kids. You see, children aren't exempt from any of the losses. And we can't keep them from knowing it's okay to cry. We have got to let them have their feelings and let them go through this process as well. About 1.5 million kids have lost one or both parents by the age of 15. And then, you know, we talked about the collective grief. Well, we also had collective death with COVID. Over 140,000 children under the age of 18 were orphaned during COVID-19. They're either being raised by grandparents or another relative. And that's an amazing loss, traumatic loss for those children. Prolonged grief disorder or chronic grief, it may even get worse and the symptoms increase. And they did a research study in the United Kingdom. And when they did this research study after COVID, they took a look at pre-COVID and post-COVID, and at 13 months and 25 months, there was a tremendous increase of percentage of prolonged grief disorder. So we know, and of course we don't get a lot of education in people that aren't in nursing or aren't in healthcare professions or mental health professions. It's wonderful if we can help people find a strategy that will be helpful for them. So to summarize, the normal grief process is painful, but expect it to lessen over time, 6 months to a year. They say after the first year, sometimes it's extremely harder after the first year, because sometimes if you, let's say, are a widow, you're now making decisions. Do I want to sell the house? Do I want to sell the truck? You might be making more financial and life-changing decisions that need to be made, you know, during that first part of the second year. And as far as talking about moving forward, I want you to realize that even baby steps are steps. Don't push yourself to think that you need to be a certain place that you're not. Let your grief strategy, your GPSS, help you understand what it is, live through it, accept the new reality is here to stay. We can't go back. Allow yourself to feel that pain. Jesus wept is the smallest verse in Scripture, but what does that tell you? You're allowed to cry when your friends die, because the story of Jesus is when his friend Lazarus had died. You're allowed to feel that pain. Allow yourself and your friends and your family, allow them the permission to have the feelings. Don't make them buck up. Over time, with grief, we adjust to the new reality. And please don't ignore the red flags of complicated grief. When you see that someone cannot move forward and you see any of those signs and symptoms, even if you're looking at yourself, if you're looking at yourself and you know, I'm not moving forward, I need to work on this, I need to get some professional help. There's nothing wrong with professional help. It's a wonderful thing that we have mental health people, we have counselors, we have pastors, we have faith community nurses, we have friends and people who will help us through this. You don't have to go through it alone. Grief is a painful process, but it is a process that we need to go through. So I'm Dr. Donna Kinchlow. I thank you so much. If you need to contact me, feel free to. And it's been a joy. Have a great week. Be blessed. And I will talk to you next session.